Hey y'all, it's Dr. Mandy, and you're listening to Dr. Mandy Unedited, the podcast where we talk about all things research, academic writing, and even being a PhD student. So, today we are discussing how I managed but didn't manage my undiagnosed ADHD during my PhD. And this might turn out just to be a whole life journey about me with ADHD. So, if you want something more learningful in academics, check out some of my other episodes. This is meant to be a break from some of the heavy topics that we've been talking about. We've been doing a really deep methodological dive. In the previous episode, we talked about sampling and setting. So if you just want to go and have some guidance on those things, go check it out. But I really think that this episode might be helpful to not only people who are neurodivergent but also for people who may find themselves really intimidated by the academic process. All right, so let's talk about my journey into neurospiciness. Y'all, all of my life I have been sat here thinking that I was quirky, I was weird, and I've talked about before that I thought that I just wasn't a smart person. And I never considered that there was a good reason for that. My brain just wasn't wired like everyone else's, but I just didn't know that for most of my life. So it wasn't until I got into teaching that I started to become enlightened that maybe I am neurodivergent. So, you see, I started teaching a lot of neurodivergent kids probably like 7 or 8 years ago. And the more I got to know these kids, the more I started to realize how they had a lot of the same anxieties that I had growing up about learning. So I grew up in an extremely intelligent family. All of my my immediate family members have doctoral degrees as well, some even medical. So being around those highly intelligent people growing up, I really just felt like my ability to learn was so. I was really bad at tests, especially multiple choice tests growing up. I had a lot of anxiety around schoolwork, and my reading comprehension was just really trash. So, a good example of this is that my brother graduated from high school with enough credits to be a university junior. And here I am, like, barely making it out of high school. And then I ended up dropping out of uni my second year. And I really struggled to get back in because I couldn't pass entrance exams. So back to the students. As I started working more and more with my students, I really started to find a passion in trying to find learning things that were tailored to what they needed as neurodiverse students, that would help them learn better. And so as these methods started working, I thought, hey, maybe I'll apply some of these things to my life. And then wouldn't you know it, my life started to improve. So I started to think that maybe I was a neurodivergent person too at this point. And so if I just looked into it a little bit more, I could really find some things that would help me with what I struggled with daily, like concentration and tests and reading. So, eventually, I started to see that my symptoms aligned with ADHD. So, let me tell you the truth about the ADHD, okay? ADHD basically means that my brain is just wired differently from normal. People with ADHD have low dopamine and low, oh, I wrote this word down, but I don't think I'm gonna say it right, norepinephrine. And these are chemicals that you need for attention, motivation, and impulse control. But the thing is that I never considered that it could be possible that I had ADHD because I thought that ADHD was like the kid that you saw, at school who was always running around, always running his mouth, couldn't sit still. But I found out that there's actually multiple kinds of ADHD. So that kind of ADHD that I think, I don't know, in my perception, maybe most people are familiar with is hyperactive ADHD, which basically means all of the hyperactivity is happening on the outside. You also have combined ADHD, which is what I have, but this means that you have traits of both hyperactive ADHD and inattentive ADHD, which is what I portray more traits in. So I didn't know that there was this version called inattentive ADHD, and basically that just means that all of the hyperactivity that you might see in other people that happens on the outside happens in your mind. So, yeah, I have combined ADHD because I do show tendencies of the hyperactive side, but I mostly lean towards the inattentive side. So when I realized that, I was just like, oh my gosh, like all of the symptoms for someone like that and ADHD really aligned for me. So it was just super helpful when starting my PhD that I was aware of this because I really started to understand the way that my mind worked for the first time in my life. And so, as you may or may not be aware of, as soon as I started my PhD, I met the love of my life who's from the UK. So, early on in my PhD program, I knew that the likeliness that I would be moving to the UK eventually was very high. So even though I had just, discovered this whole new world about myself, I chose not to seek any medical help for ADHD until I moved to the UK because, I mean, in all honesty, it would just cost a lot less there. So, because in the US, the prescription medicine for managing ADHD would probably cost without insurance about $500 a month. But in the UK, your taxes go towards the national health care system, and therefore the diagnosis would be free, and then the medication would be about $10 a month. But TDLR is that I could not afford the healthcare for ADHD in the US, so I just started my PhD journey. I just decided to grin and bear it. So let me tell you about the PhD journey, okay? I know that this is not the case for many people, but my PhD journey, it changed my life. I think it started with like the layout of my PhD program. So mine was an online program where there was 6-week courses, okay? Every week you would have like a couple of small tasks and then like a big paper to do. Now, I've said this before that up until this point in my life, I thought I was just I just thought I wasn't very smart. And so, in some respect, applying for a PhD program for me was just to see if I could do it, to keep up with it, to keep up with my family. However, I think people with ADHD have a very different reward system in our minds than most people. So, in order to get that hit of excitement in our lives, we often need tasks broken down into tiny steps that are engaging enough to complete. And so, that was very much what my program was like, these tiny tasks to complete each week. Once I did one course, of course, being a twice university dropout, I thought I was going to have horrible grades, and I thought I was going to fail, but I ended up passing with flying colors. And then I took another course, and guess what? The next course I passed again. So this gave my little ADHD mind a huge boost, and I really found a lot of confidence. But that didn't mean that I wasn't struggling, with the ADHD symptoms. So here are some things that really, really helped me that even if you don't have ADHD, but maybe you just struggle with focus or motivation to sit down and do things, really consider using some of these things, okay? So the biggest issue for me during my PhD with ADHD was that I had little time and no focus. So sometimes I sit down and I have all of the focus in the world, and sometimes I have none at all. And this can just vary day by day and really have no cue to why sometimes I can really focus and sometimes I really can't. So, at the time of my PhD in the US, I was working 6 days a week, 60 hours a week. So I really needed to use the time that I had wisely. So the biggest tip that I have for people that might be like me is just give in. Just give in to the tendencies. I had to learn to give in to the ADHD tendencies instead of trying to fight them. And so, what I mean by this is that I would try to force myself to sit down and focus. However, that would just bring a lot of frustration because, like with inattentive ADHD, your mind can just wander without you realizing it. So, a lot of times I would really want to sit down, so you focus on something, and then I would find out like a lot of time has gone by without me actually doing anything because my mind, without me knowing, has gone somewhere else. So I would get really worked up just trying to like sit down and work. Eventually, I had to like develop this really wild pattern that I could really only do on my one day off. But this is what giving into the ADHD looked like for me. I would schedule like 12 to 16 hours of my day, and then I would just sit and write for 5 minutes, goof off for 5 minutes, and then repeat that over and over again for hours at a time. All right. So I would just sit and write, and then I would goof off, sit and write, then I would goof off. And I know that sounds so tedious, but it worked. I got so much more work done just giving into that and just going with the flow of my ADHD instead of instead of trying to force myself into patterns that just don't work for me. Okay. So then I really started developing my ADHD style from there. One of the other core things that I love to use is a timer, which, if you are a student with ADHD, you absolutely need something like this. I don't think that I have issues with time blindness, as a lot of other people with ADHD say, but I do lose sense of time sometimes when I am working. So the thing about the timer is that if I turn it on and I work for a little while, I used to be like, okay, that's enough work for me. Close my laptop, go away. But when I started using the timer, I would look down at it and go, oh, actually, I've only worked for 15 minutes. So the timer has been really helpful to keep me sat down and going for longer, and I've definitely gotten a lot more work done because of it. Another thing that people with ADHD often like is gamification or challenges. So I would do this all the time with myself throughout my PhD program. I would challenge myself to see if I could even get like a fraction of a point higher on the next assignment from the last. I even made myself like a little like progress thermometer when I was recruiting participants and collecting data. And then every time I would mark it as soon as I completed data collection. And so I decorated it with like little markers, and it has me and my partner on it. It's really cute. I keep it as a keepsake now. And lastly, I got myself all of those little fidget gadgets, the wiggle chairs, I chew the gum. Overall, because I really gave into my ADHD-ness, and I started to understand myself better. I graduated my PhD program in about 2 years and 9 months. I wrote my dissertation in like 5 months, and I graduated with a high distinction, which is, far from the poor person that could not keep their GPA above like a 2.0 in university. So, all of these things really collected into giving myself so much more confidence in my intellect. And it definitely helped me really battle my imposter syndrome as well, the more successful I was throughout the program. It wasn't until a year after I finished my PhD that I officially was diagnosed with ADHD. I got medication, which is not for everybody, but man, do I wish that I could go back and do the PhD medicated, because then I would be a power boss. Anyway, I hope that this story just helps somebody out, whether you have ADHD or you're trying to just navigate life or a higher education program, or you're just feeling like an imposter in your PhD program, okay? All right, y'all, that is enough from me. But if you can't get enough of me, remember that you can always reach out to me in my email, mandykf@gmail.com. That's MANDIEKF at gmail.com. or my website, Dr. Mandy Edits. If you're interested to see what else I am going on in my life, you can definitely check out my social media that's on the link tree. I have TikTok, I have some Instagram, I have YouTube, all that good stuff. Next week, we are going to talk about data collection, okay? So, all about how to choose the right data methods, how to choose them strategically, and how the right data collections can really enhance your research. All right, y'all, that is enough from me. It is time to go read your reviewers' comments, and I'll see you later. Okay, bye.